The room was silent except for the ragged, uneven breaths of the man lying before him. The centurion knelt beside him, his fingers hovering just above his beloved's damp forehead, afraid to touch, afraid to acknowledge how much this moment was unraveling him. He had seen men fall in battle, had ordered deaths without hesitation, but never had he felt this kind of fear, an ache that hollowed him out from the inside. His hand trembled as he finally pressed his palm against fevered skin, tracing the line of his confidant's cheek with his thumb, a touch so light it barely existed. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice raw. The words escaped before he could stop them, but they hung between them, undeniable. No title, no rank, no duty, only this. His fingers slid down, curling over a hand that had once gripped his own in laughter, in quiet moments stolen between commands and duty. He had never spoken of it, never dared to name it, but as his beloved's breath hitched, weak and fragile, the truth pressed against his chest like a weight he could no longer bear. This is the story of a man who held power over 100 soldiers, yet stood powerless before a single life. A story not of conquest, but of love. A story of a soldier who knelt before a prophet. Not for war, not for Rome, but for the man he could not bear to lose. The tale of the centurion and his servant has been framed as a simple account of faith. A Roman officer, hardened by war, humbling himself before a foreign prophet to seek healing for a valued member of his household. A noble act, a dutiful master, a man of authority who, for reasons left largely unexamined, set aside his status and came to Jesus in person. He had fought wars, commanded men, bent entire cities to his will. But here, now, he was powerless. He bowed his head against the bedframe, whispering a plea, not to Rome, not to the gods of his people, but to something greater, something he had once mocked but now desperately needed. The centurion stood motionless at the threshold, his breath shallow, his chest rising and falling with the weight of something he refused to name. On the bed, the servant lay still, his skin pale, his lips cracked. His breathing was uneven, each exhale a battle against something unseen, something cruel. The centurion clenched his fists at his sides. He had been here before, watching men fall, hearing their last gasps on the battlefield, stepping over lifeless bodies that had once obeyed his every command. But this was different. This was not war, and this was not a soldier. He stepped forward, sinking to his knees beside the bed. His hand hovered over the servant's forehead, close enough to feel the unnatural heat radiating from him, but he did not touch. "Hold on," he whispered. "Do you hear me? You will not leave me." There was no response. The centurion squeezed his eyes shut. He could not lose him, not him. He inhaled sharply, straightened his back. There was one last chance. A healer, a man they spoke of in hushed voices, a foreign prophet, Jesus. And for him, for this man, he would kneel. But why did he come himself? Roman commanders did not beg, least of all for a servant. A request like this could have been sent through a messenger, a subordinate, even another soldier. Yet the centurion, a man accustomed to power, chose to plead in the open, in front of a crowd, before a Jewish healer. And when he spoke, he did not use the common term for a servant, doulos, but a word far more intimate, pais. It was a word that, in many contexts, referred not just to a servant, but to a cherished companion, one bound by something deeper than duty. If this was only about obligation, why did it unravel him? Why was his desperation so raw? This was not the voice of a master speaking of his servant. This was the voice of a man fighting to save someone he could not bear to lose. The first time the centurion saw him, the boy was no more than a shadow moving through firelight, just another presence in the flickering glow of the torches. Servants came and went, faces blurred together, names barely worth remembering. But something about this one made him pause. The way he moved, not timid, not fearful, but deliberate, as if he belonged, as if the world had not yet taught him otherwise. Then their eyes met. It was fleeting, a glance stolen in the hush of the night, yet it struck the centurion like a blade between the ribs. He had fought battles, watched men fall beneath his command, stepped over lifeless bodies without hesitation. But this was something else. He should have turned away. Instead, he found himself watching, listening, memorizing the way the firelight curved against his skin, The servant had never imagined his heart would betray him like this. At first, the centurion was just a figure in the shadows, a man of war whose presence commanded silence. But then came the stolen glances, the quiet moments when their eyes met across the fire-lit corridors. The first time the centurion spoke his name, something shifted inside him. "You move like a soldier," the centurion murmured one evening, watching him arrange the weapons in the armory. "Not like a servant." The boy hesitated, unsure if it was a compliment or something more. "And you watch me like I'm more than that," he dared to say. The centurion said nothing, but the silence between them burned. The servant should have been afraid. Instead, he found himself lingering, drawn to a man who was both his master and something far more dangerous. Love had crept in like an ambush, silent, inescapable, and absolute. The news came suddenly. A whisper in the halls, a murmur among the slaves. The boy was ill, worse than ill, dying. The centurion's feet moved before reason could stop him. Past the courtyard, past the confused stares of his men, past the expectations of rank and duty. A Roman officer did not enter a servant's quarters. Yet, for the first time in his life, he did not care. He had fought every battle but this one. He had exhausted every remedy, every whispered cure from the old physicians, every offering to the gods he once trusted. Nothing had worked. With each labored breath the boy took, the weight in his chest grew heavier, the fear more suffocating. There was only one hope left, the healer they spoke of in hushed voices, the man who had done the impossible. If there was even the smallest chance, even the faintest hope, he would take it, because losing the boy was not something he could endure. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly." Matthew 8, verses 5-6. The crowd hushed as the centurion stepped forward. Roman soldiers did not beg, not in the streets, not before a man dressed in plain robes. Yet here he stood before the teacher from Nazareth, his voice raw, his words trembling. He humbled himself, cast aside his rank, his power, and his pride, standing before this healer with nothing but a plea. "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but say the word, and he will be healed." Jesus met his gaze, not with condemnation, not with distrust, but with understanding. "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." Luke 7:9. Faith, Jesus had called it, but the centurion knew it was something far greater, something raw and relentless. This was love, the kind that stripped a man of pride, that made him kneel before a foreign prophet with no care for the watching crowd. If there was even a sliver of hope, he would grasp it, not for honor, not for duty, but for the chance to hold the one he could not bear to lose. "Your faith has healed him." And with that, it was done. The centurion felt something loosen in his chest, something long coiled tight. He did not thank Jesus aloud. He could not. Instead, he rushed through the streets, his heartbeat pounding louder than his footsteps, pushing past startled onlookers as desperation drove him forward. Reaching the house, he tore through the corridors, his eyes darting wildly, searching, praying, until he saw him, standing whole and waiting. The servant was at the well, water dripping from his fingers. He turned, his breath catching as their eyes met, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. The centurion had torn through pride and rank, had humbled himself before a foreign prophet, had risked everything, not for duty, not for Rome, but for him. The centurion took a step forward, hesitation flickering just for a second before he breathed, "You are healed." Something inside the servant broke. He crossed the space between them and, before reason could stop him, threw himself into the centurion's arms. The embrace was fierce, unguarded, the kind of touch neither of them had dared before. The centurion's grip tightened, his fingers pressing against the servant's back as if grounding himself in the reality that he was here, alive, real. Onlookers paused, whispering among themselves, but for the first time there was no judgment, no sneering glances, only quiet acknowledgement. The truth settling over them like a dawning light. They had seen the stolen glances, the urgency in his steps when he rushed to the servant's side, the raw desperation in his plea. Now, as they embraced, there was no doubt. What had been whispered, questioned and dismissed, was proven beyond denial. The centurion exhaled, the weight of unspoken truths settling between them. The world would never fully grasp what had been risked, the silent prayers uttered in the dark, or the fear that had nearly broken him. Yet, as onlookers pieced together what had always been there, none of it mattered. He had fought for love, not alone, but with the one who now stood beside him, whole, alive, and his. And this, above all, was victory. A love that defied all expectations. A love the Bible never named but left for us to unravel.